Thor Ragnarok is overrated. I understand why the production team felt the need to take Thor in a new direction, but by doing so, Thor Ragnarok undercuts everything previously established about Thor's mythos. Now, if you didn't care for either of the previous two Thor films, I imagine you found the God of Thunder's newfound sense of irreverent humor to be a delightful surprise. But if you're like me, and actually enjoyed one of Thor's previous outings, then some of Ragnarok may have left you feeling frustrated. To be clear, my issues with Ragnarok do not come from the comedy itself. I've always enjoyed Marvel's sense of humor, and that is no different with Ragnarok. Though the comedy can create a jarring tone, my issues mainly lie with the execution of how Thor's character was deconstructed. To begin, Thor Ragnarok feels like the campaign to a video game sequel. The easiest example I can think of is Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Much of Assassin's Creed 2 is spent trying to build up an impenetrable armor outfit for Ezio, something that is only accomplished once the game is nearly completed. But in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, that armor is immediately stripped away from Ezio because the campaign would be too easy with that armor on. Most other video games have similar tropes, but that was the first example that came to my mind since I don't play video games all too often. My point is, everything we know about Thor gets stripped away from him in the first act. His hammer, gone. His girlfriend, dumped. His dad becomes one with the Force. His three best friends, murdered without any remorse. Lady Sif, mysteriously absent. His home, at the brink of destruction. So much happens to Thor within the first 30 minutes that the pacing gave me whiplash. Ultimately, the goal was to teach Thor and the audience that he doesn't need all of these things to be the God of Thunder. His heroic strength comes from within, and home is defined by the people within it as opposed to the precise location of it. Those are nice lessons to be learned, for sure, but Thor never feels like he's in the process of learning them. Instead of taking a beat to reflect over all of which he has lost, he kind of just accepts whatever comes his way. The worst example of this comes from Thor's own best friends, the Warriors 3. The death of the Warriors 3 really pissed me off. They may not have been important or memorable characters to mainstream audiences, but they were important to Thor. By the end of the film, it's not even clear if Thor knows or cares that his three best buddies are dead. I don't need Thor to be sulking in sadness over his losses, but he doesn't even take a quick second to acknowledge the death of his loved ones. How much more impactful would the story feel if we just had these brief moments where Thor's reflecting over his losses and wondering if he can even find the strength to go on without them? Then he can shake it off and get right back into the comedy. I just don't understand why so much emphasis would be placed on the importance of certain characters if they were not going to end up being important anyway. The Warriors 3 aren't even given a proper send-off, they're just quickly killed off. It happened so fast that general audience members probably wouldn't have even known that their characters were vital and integral pieces to the first two Thor films. Scourge even gets a better send-off where he gets to redeem himself for betraying Asgard. There is an entire subplot dedicated to his entire arc, but the Warriors 3, they get nothing. Now, I'm not in love with the Warriors 3, I wouldn't even be able to name them, let alone describe any of their defining character traits, but my complaints come from the principle of stripping something important away from our protagonist without having any repercussions. Let's take Valkyrie and Korg for example. These are two brand new characters that Thor befriended, and they were both very well received from audience members. Now, if Marvel ever decided to make a fourth Thor film and take it into an entirely new direction again, there is nothing to stop the new director from just killing off these characters unceremoniously. I mean, why not? It's not like they're Thor's lifelong friends, they're just two strangers that he just met not too long ago. Thor barely even knows anything about them, so why would it be important for them to stick around? Don't spend so much time telling the audience someone or something is important if their absence hardly affects the storyline. Otherwise, we would care about characters in the Transformers films. Imagine if in Avengers 4, the events that took place in Avengers Infinity War didn't matter. Infinity War is supposed to be the culmination of everything that has ever occurred within the MCU, and the hype surrounding its release could not be higher. But if Avengers 4 was turned into a screwball comedy for the sake of being different, then what was all that hype around Infinity War for? If Avengers Infinity War is a great movie that can stand on its own, then a comedy-driven Avengers 4 would not ruin the film, but it would undercut the experience and importance that audiences believed the film to have. Now, the Avengers example is an extreme one that is likely not going to happen, but it does showcase my point. It would be like if Lucasfilm decided to make a Star Wars movie that deconstructed the main hero by having him be drastically different than what audiences remembered, and undercut serious moments with forced attempts at humor, and had important tertiary characters like Admiral Akbar randomly die off for no reason at all. Oh wait, all of that did happen, yet I hardly hear as many complaints about Thor Ragnarok as I do about Star Wars The Last Jedi. Audiences may be more fond of Star Wars movies than they are for Marvel films, but The Last Jedi and Thor Ragnarok are similar in how they were both trying to deconstruct the movies that came before it. I'm on board with the concept of rethinking Thor's characterization, but it all comes down to the execution. Odin's death, for example, had no emotional impact on the story at all. He just goes away. Aside from having me question what happens to Asgardians when they die, his disappearance also had me wondering about Asgardian culture in general. For instance, why didn't anyone remember Hela? Or the fact that Odin was once a malevolent ruler who built his kingdom atop of blood and lies. He couldn't have banished all of them, right? Because then he wouldn't have had a kingdom to rule over? I understand most civilizations in the real world are built this way, but the Asgardians can live for thousands of years, so why wouldn't they remember their own history? I don't know, but it doesn't matter, and the film moves on before you can even think about it. I haven't even begun to mention Hela yet. What a waste of Cate Blanchett to have her play such an uninteresting villain. Hela wants to rule Asgard and conquer the universe because evil reasons, all while Thor is having a fun side adventure with friends. The plot is essentially split into two parts, with one story taking place on Asgard, while the other is taking place on Sakaar. By juxtaposing these two storylines, Hela just happens to have the less interesting narrative, on top of already being a weak villain with poor character motivation. I wish Taika Waititi would have picked one storyline over the other, since either one of them would have worked perfectly fine on their own, but I have to admit that the Sakaar plot is much more enjoyable. It would have been interesting to see Marvel let the Grand Master be the main villain of the overall film. He may not be the greatest villain, but at least he is more engaging and entertaining than Hela. It also would have been refreshing to see Marvel take a crack at a different kind of villain with motivations that don't involve conquering everything just for the sake of being evil. And how fun would it have been to see more of Jeff Goldblum as the Grand Master? He does cause most of the obstacles put in Thor's way after all. By comparison, Hela and Thor only have about 2 scenes together. If the emphasis was placed more on Sakaar to begin with, we could have gotten an interesting comedy version of Gladiator. Maybe a comical interpretation of Gladiator would have given Thor an interesting spiritual journey to make up for the range of emotion he seems to lack. My favorite aspects about Thor Ragnarok are the opening and closing sequences. The beginning scene with Surtur is fun and sets the tone for the rest of the movie. The humor in this scene works really well, but as I said, the humor in this movie is not what I take issue with. It is the underdevelopment, underutilization, and sheer disregard for previously established characters that irks me. But my absolute favorite part of Ragnarok has to come from the film's final moments. Yes, the final fight is quite a marvelous spectacle, but I'm referring to the falling action that occurs afterwards. Thor learns to channel his inner strength. He realizes that Asgard is not a place, but a people, and takes his true place as King of Asgard. It is in this moment that you hear Patrick Doyle's original theme from Thor's first movie. The theme is incorporated to heighten the emotional connection between Thor and the audience. It's a beautiful scene. But what I don't understand is, if the theme from the first film is treated as important, then why weren't the original characters? As it stands, Thor Ragnarok may be a wildly entertaining film, but what it lacks is heart. Thanks for watching.